Hello everyone, I'm Thomas McColl, and I'm bringing you poetry for the cursed, coerced, combative and corrupted. And one reason the show is called that is it's not because I have a love of alliteration, although I do love alliteration. It's because I'm going to be reading some poems from my new book called Grenade Genie, which is published by Fly on the Wall Press. And the subtitle of the book is 25 Brief Studies of the Cursed, Coerced, Combative and Corrupted. So I'm going to be reading poems. So the book is split into those, divided into those 4 sections, and I'm going to read some poems from each of those sections in order. So we're going to be exploring those 4 C's and not the other C, the big C that has affected all of our lives and put us into lockdown. The thing is, at this time, with the book having just been released, I would be normally going out and trying to promote the book and doing gigs, events, even festivals. And I actually did have some booked over the next few months, but obviously I'm stuck here at home like we all are. But the great thing is, this book was officially released just yesterday. And so I'd like to thank WinchesterFest and Alex and Connor for having me as part of the festival, because it was just as I say, the book was released just yesterday, and then it happens that I'm going to be being put on here today. So it is basically the official live launch of the book. So that's brilliant. So it's kind of straight into it, doing a performance. And one of the main themes or main points made in this book is that ultimately everyone and everything is expendable. But while the knowledge of that can generate either a sense of hopelessness or the nothing to lose strength to rail against it, one of the great strengths of poetry is that even if only the former is expressed, the latter is automatically achieved. And this is a theme that runs throughout the collection and pretty much all the poems in the book. And this is the thing, sometimes people just feel that they have to just go for it and do something, make a stand, protest, even if the situation really is hopeless. And that's the theme pretty much of the first poem that I'm going to read. That is from the first section, Cursed. And it is a poem that was it's a poem called The Evil Eye. And it was a poem that was originally published in a magazine called International Times, which is a legendary magazine from the late 60s, countercultural magazine from the late 60s. And I have a copy here of one of the issues from the 60s. So as you can see, it's the old money there. And this particular issue features William Burroughs, Frank Zappa, and Malcolm X. And it was a magazine, it was started up again more recently online, and it's actually become a print issue again as well. So I was really chuffed to be included in that magazine, to follow in the footsteps of William Burroughs and writers of his ilk. And it is very much still a countercultural magazine. This poem, so I'm going to read this poem first that was included in that magazine and is now in the book. And it is called The Evil Eye. So it's a poem where a father is warning his son about how social media will regard him as an expendable commodity to strip of information. So it's as I say, and this is in the cursed section. You're too far gone and clearly unable to heed my plea. But still I have to tell you, son, you wouldn't expect a key to leave its shadow behind when picked up from a table. That's what's happening now to you online. Hidden interests constantly mine your data. Every moment you're manipulated. But as long as your need to exist, like everyone else now needs to exist, is sated, everything's fine. And let's face it, how can you stop? It's fame, albeit the tiniest drop. Even if there's no one who could possibly give a damn about those selfies you constantly upload onto Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Don't you realize that you exist no more than you did before? Less, in fact. You've made a pact with the digital devil. not even to be an insect preserved in amber, but simply an insect that's landed on a cobweb stretched out directly in front of an amber signal, and as soon as you're lit up, no one hangs around. You've allowed yourself to get caught in a cobweb, spun by a social spider that sucks you dry of information, then leaves your hollowed out exoskeletal frame to rot on its website. In any event, the next day there's a brand new cobweb. Once again, you feel the need to be captured. Reality, which after all is the resin of reason, dictates that even with your endless selfies, your life is no more or less preserved than the totally unrecorded life of the Afghan shepherd who in 1971, believing correctly the camera lens to be the evil eye, refused to allow a hapless hippie to take his photograph, knowing his soul would be sucked dry, and that whatever he did, whether he acquiesced or not, the hindered hippie's straightened out son will be back for Queen and country in 30 years' time. The shepherd pointed the barrel of his rifle straight at the horrified hippie's acid-drenched head and told him to get the fuck out of Helmand. You're too far gone, and clearly unable to heed my plea, but still I have to tell you, son, just because there's no going back to the 7th century doesn't mean there's nothing you can learn from its doomed last stand against the present one. Well, yeah, so that was a poem about social media. And the thing about social media is that it can really help to kind of bring an issue to the fore very quickly and very dramatically. And so everyone's concerned about it and expressing their concern, and it becomes this big issue that's on everyone's minds. But what it can also do as well is very quickly and very dramatically it kind of disappears just as quickly, and like a stone, it'll just drop off the radar. And that's kind of what happened with the situation with the refugee crisis, which back in 2016, it's on everyone's minds. It was very much in the media, across social media, and everyone's talking about it. And it does seem to have dropped off the radar quite a bit, but it's still as much of an issue as it was back then. And this is what the next poem in the curse section is about, and it is called Carry My Eyes Above and Across the Barbed Wire Border. The best I can do by daylight, hiding in the undergrowth beyond the camp, is fall asleep and let eyelids turned into wings carry my eyes, in my dreams always the colour of sky-high blue, above and across the barbed wire border. I'm awoken when my eyes return and burn into me the realization that even if I don't drown in the peat bogs or get taken down by the prowling guards with their vicious dogs, getting across is no guarantee of success. Europe, which projects a Gorgon-frenzied lust for freedom that turns to stone as soon as it knows it's captured you in its flatline eyebrow trance, is a never-ending fortress. Whoever said the modern world is round has never seen its medieval edge right here at the borderline. No Twitter post can compete with a border post. Millions of messages lie out of sight, obscured by one unwelcoming sign. I hear that there are many now discussing our terrible plight, saying welcome the refugee, but my tears-tortured eyes are tired of earning nothing more than sympathy. I return to the crowded, squalid camp and exhausted again fall asleep. This time as they fly across the border, my dreaming of a new life, bloodshot eyes spy the approach of reporters in roving bands. We're here to tell your story, they always say, how you fled civil war and want to be given a chance. But I know that they don't care. They'll turn my truth into some kind of lie, and I won't talk to them nor extend my palm, which would reveal my cut and calloused lifeline. Just tell them with a steely stare, don't hug me with your inverted commas, nor touch me with your cruel chameleon hands. It's quite a good device, me putting the glasses back on and taking them off. So you can tell when I finish the poem when I put the glasses back on. So anyway, there we are. With the next poem I'm going to read is one called The Bunker. It takes, again, from the curse section, it takes the form of a folk tale, but it is really referring to the Grenfell fire. It's called The Bunker because it is about a decaying nuclear bunker. And when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, there used to always be these kind of, you'd see these kind of buildings that were kind of set in the ground and there'd be kind of grass on top of them. And people would say to me, oh, that's a nuclear bunker there, but no one knows it's not that. The government hasn't said that's what it is, and no one knows officially that that's, an actual bunker, and so it's basically there was always these kind of apparently these things dotted around these buildings that were just underground bunkers, and often I think it's probably just people making that up and just kind of saying, oh, that's what that is. But it was the case of what this poem is about is then it's this bunker that's so secret. It's because the government hasn't confirmed or denied or hasn't said anything about this structure, then a high-rise block of flats has been built on top of it by mistake, without, because the different government departments weren't talking to each other. And so this has happened. And so it's like a curse. There's this high-rise block of flats on top of this decaying nuclear bunker. So yeah, that's what this next poem is about. And it is simply called The Bunker. Our seedy tower block sits on top of a Cold War nuclear bunker, both the work of cowboy builders who all died in mysterious circumstances, one by one throughout the 1970s. Even now, after years of demanding answers, no one's prepared to address our concerns, and all because they concern a structure which still officially doesn't exist. I wasn't alive in 1965 when the Ministry of Secret Buildings, continuing to keep the bunker's location secret, failed to inform the Ministry of misconceived ideas which allowed our high-rise flats to be built on top. I was very much alive though in 1991 when I inadvertently discovered the bunker's entrance late one evening. Hearing cries for help in dense shrubs near our block, I found a loose manhole cover and, descending a rusty ladder into a sprawling concrete complex, was shocked to stumble upon charred human remains. Terrified, I ran straight out and rang the police. But after bundling me into their car, the plainclothes slipped acid into my tea in the station, charged me with possession and making a false report while under the influence. By the time the charges were dropped, the cash-strapped council had hurriedly built a basketball court at the very spot where the manhole cover had been. Well, here I am, just about alive in 2017. Hard experience has made me realize what we as residents are up against, but the bunker, a ticking time bomb, remains beneath us. And though that acid trip might have clouded my memory, and maybe the bunker never was filled up with burnt bodies, it still needs to be condemned along with our block, two Cold War relics that have no place in the 21st century. And it's not just me. Most residents have come to realize the government's trying to hide an omen. Let's face it, every time they claim there's nothing there, but won't explain why that information is classified, it's clear the bunker does exist. I wasn't off my head. Meanwhile, fearing a cover-up, residents worry that this shoddily built structure we inhabit, undermined by the crumbling bunker, will eventually collapse. But I know what I saw, and even if it was all just in my mind, it portends a fate that's even worse. What the bunker was never used for may someday be unleashed, a stored-up curse, as destructive as a nuclear blast, but more concentrated, spiraling as a furious fire, then collapsing catastrophically into black holes that once were windows. Well, I guess, maybe now is as good a time as any really to tell you a bit more about myself. I'm let's say Thomas McColl, but I'm known as Tom. I'm 49 and I've lived in London for 30 years. You could possibly tell that I don't actually have a London accent, but I was actually born in London, but at the age of 2, my parents moved up to Birmingham. So I lived there till I was 20, and so I kind of gained, you could probably hear the twang, it's like twang of the Birmingham accent there. And moved down to London at the age of 20 to study history at the University of North London. And so I've lived here ever since, and moved to Stratford, East London in 1995. And of course, Stratford was a bit of a deprived area at the time, but back in 95, but of course it's all been changed with the Olympics and all that kind of thing. And I've always kind of written, gone to writing events and written and sent off to poetry magazines throughout the 90s and the noughties, and I've actually had 2 collections out now. So this one, Grenade Genie, is my 2nd collection, and so I've often at events in London. It's mainly in London that I do gigs and events, but I know Winchester is in between between London and Kent. And but I do have some. I've had some involvement with the Kent poetry scene. I was at. I read it. Well, I was part of Westword's 2019, which was at the Westwood Cross shopping centre near Margate, and actually was reading my poems in the shopping centre itself, which was quite an experience. And I've read at the Faversham Fringe, which is where I first met Alex, who's helped to organise this festival. And the next poem I'm going to read was one that I read, especially wrote for an event called Landing Place, which was a series of events that were held at the Turner Contemporary in Margate, and a fantastic building. And it was the theme of this particular event was April is the cruelest month, which is a quote from The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, because T.S. Eliot wrote most of The Wasteland there in Margate when he was there back in 1921. And so that was the theme of that. And so I especially wrote this poem for it. And I was really pleased to kind of got what I felt was a good poem out of it. And that was where I first met Connor at that event. So yeah, so I'm going to read this poem next. And it is a poem that it's about Instagram poetry and a poetry icon, we know who that is now, and my relationship with both. And it is modestly called The Greatest Poem. I've been thinking that if I visit the Nayland Rock Shelter overlooking Margate Sands at the right time in the autumn of 2021, exactly 100 years on from when Thomas Stearns Eliot went there to write his masterpiece, The Wasteland, the greatest poem of the 20th century, then if I sit there long enough with my laptop, maybe I'll end up writing the greatest poem of the 21st century. Things in my favour. My first name is Thomas. I once worked for Lloyds Bank and I write poetry. Things that might go against me. My surname isn't Eliot, it's McColl. Working for Lloyds Bank is in itself no indicator of literary talent. And anyway, history doesn't tend to repeat itself. In fact, what if this time round the inverse happens and I end up writing the worst poem of the 21st century? In the current climate, it's highly likely. Let's face it, Thomas Stearns Eliot had advances in psychoanalysis to help him get in the right frame of mind, whereas all I have is advances in social media. Who knows, maybe by 2021, I'll have no choice but to fit my opus into 4 lines on Instagram. But then when I do, my simple artless platitude will inexplicably receive 1 million likes, and then released as part of a book will inexplicably sell 1 million copies. And my poem will be so bad that everyone will definitely remember it much more than whatever the best poem of the 21st century will actually be. Written perhaps by someone who, like Eliot, may be going through difficult times and talented enough to harness adversity, will out of that create a brilliant epic poem. But unfortunately, there'll no longer be anyone with the attention span to read it, let alone publish it. And he or she in despair will delete it and give up writing altogether. Whereas I'll go on to publish book after book, and William McGonagall will turn in his grave at no longer being the worst poet in the English language, usurped by Thomas McColl, now famous for having written the worst poem of the 21st century, or indeed any century. But that's the thing, writing the worst ever poem is no barrier anymore to immense success. Thomas Stearns Eliot may well have been the best, but there's no room for that now. Now it has to be 4 lines or less and totally trite. 1921, been and gone. 2021, bring it on. Right, well, that's, yeah, so that was, I read an early version of that poem at Landing Place, and that was a poem that references the Scottish poet William McGonagall, and he's famous for being, he's kind of seen as like the worst poet ever in the English language. And I say English language, but of course he was very much a Scottish poet, you know, using the Scottish vernacular. And I mean, he is celebrated in Scotland. I mean, everyone in Scotland knows that he was a terrible poet, but you know, he's famous for that. And when I was a child back home in Birmingham, my dad's Scottish background, and the only poetry book that we had in the house was a book of poems by William McGonagall. So I could say he was an early influence on me, and maybe hopefully in a sense that I was thinking, you know, I can do better than that. I mean, hopefully it's not that my poetry is actually as bad as his, but anyway. So, but yeah, he was. I mean, his poetry is. I mean, it's so bad it's good. So That's kind of, in a way, why he's celebrated. Right, the last poem I'm going to read from this section, from the cursed section, is actually the title poem. So it's Grenade Genie. And the idea behind this poem was basically it's kind of about someone who possesses genius, and it's quite often, you know, the person who does possess genius and is able to create something out of that is the person that doesn't get any recognition, and it's usually people who are lesser than him that end up taking all the credit. And that's kind of what this poem is about, and that's why it's in the curse section. And the idea is, you know, this person he or she possesses genius, but it's in a grenade, and so he or she has to pull the pin to access that genius with obvious consequences. Anyway, so that's what this is about. And so, yep. So I'm going to read this one next after I have a swig of water from my Frida Kahlo flask, which is actually my partner's, but you know, it looks very nice. So. Right. So yes, Grenade Genie. Possessing genius is one thing, but are you prepared on finding it encased inside a grenade to pull out the pin to release the genie and therefore be on the receiving end of the huge explosion? In other words, are you prepared to be obliterated, meaning you won't even get to see above the billowing smoke the now released genie granting every wish to all your atoms that dispersed and already forming into new but lesser versions of you will proceed to take all the credit you were due as if you never actually existed, as if the credit had always been theirs to take. Essentially, it's genius for everyone else's sake but yours. It's still the only kind of genius worth possessing, the kind that changes everything. Grenadeless genius is worthless. It's just that if it turns out you're the one who pulls the pin, there's no guarantee you'll even be remembered. For only one thing is certain: the grenade genie, arbiter of atoms, doesn't care. He knows that genius is a combustible commodity. Once released, he's simply there to give out all the credit indiscriminately. Anyway, the undeserving horde that ends up in receipt of it will soon enough be wiped out too, when everyone least expects it, in the unlikeliest place, and it's almost always the unlikeliest person who'll set things off. So who knows, maybe it will be you, out of luck and living in abject poverty, with nothing to lose, your possession of genius amounting to nothing more than the pull pin held between your teeth, and the self-belief that got you there, except that there, as it turns out, is right in the middle of nowhere. But that's fate, and though the explosion will mean your life ending without you being in any way rewarded, the main thing is that history will be made, and incredibly. Vast armies of advancing traditionalists who seem to everyone unstoppable, all taken out with just one genius-filled grenade. And who knows, maybe the day will come when the atoms you released upon your death, which having congealed into lesser versions of you, the genie bestowed all credit upon, will in gratitude honor your selfless act by placing at the very spot where you blew yourself up a commemorative plaque as round and blue as the earth which in billions of years the sun will swallow up. And that's the thing, why none of it really matters. Even the round blue earth, along with your round blue plaque, must one day shatter into atoms too. Let's face it, everyone, everything and everyone is nothing more than atoms. Even the brightest human is nothing more than the lowliest animal, organism, or inanimate object. It doesn't take a genius to work that out. And though nothing matters when we're all just matter, it still remains that people who think they're more than what they're made of are there to be brought down. Even if that moment's unplanned, the grenade genie, arbiter of atoms, will always be on hand. Trust me, somewhere right at this very moment, a moment born out of desperation, there's another rat amongst the dinosaurs about to pull out the pin with its teeth. So that was the last poem in that section, the cursed section. So I'm going to move on next to the coerced section of the book. And the first poem in that section that I'm going to read first is for anyone who's ever had to wear a security pass. And this is my security pass that I have to wear for work. And it's kind of about how the security obviously that security pass represents you, but in a way that security pass is more important than you in a way, and you just represent that security pass. And so it's kind of, it's that basically that theme of where, I mean, obviously it has your name on it. Well, anyway, it's kind of, it'll be clear what it's all about. There's no point in explaining it too much beforehand, and then I'll just start rambling on as I was there earlier. But yeah, so this is simply called security pass. I've just been made permanent, yet already I know I'm completely expendable. In any event, I've today at last received a full security pass. It comes complete with a freshly taken photograph, my face displaying a grimace that was nothing more than confused surprise at the sudden camera flash, an expression that could almost pass for a desperate act of brave defiance that no one's fooled and no one cares. Anyway, the doors opening in this building aren't opening for me, but for the magnetic stripe across the card. I know full well already that it's numbers on the line, not the letters in my name the system recognizes, that a thin row of binary will always trump any last shred of humanity. Let's face it, though now clearly displayed in bold, my name, Thomas McColl, remains completely incidental, as impotent as a name that just about belongs still to some hitherto proud family firm, which, having been swallowed up by a vast conglomerating entity, is slowly but surely stripped of its former identity until there's nothing left but the name itself, a name that's only been kept in place to satisfy some irritating legal obligation. Thomas McColl Limited, that's me, limited, extremely limited, a lowly worker whose pass gives him access to just one floor in a 42-floor building. Well, here I am on the 41st floor. As soon as I exit the lift, directly in front of me, the main door, and there above it, the clocking in and out security camera, an irritating creature which is probably related in some way to the camera that took the annoyingly crappy picture displayed on my pass. Then, catching my reflection in the door's dark glass, an expression that could almost pass for a desperate act of brave defiance, I realize in a flash that my mug in fact has now been set to project a permanent stamped on the face look of confused compliance, and that my brand new pass doesn't represent me, but that I simply represent my brand new pass. Right, so yeah, well, a lot of the poems that I write are written. I like writing about London and kind of places in London. And this next poem is set in London. It's one of 3 poems in the book that are that's set on Oxford Street for some reason. I'm not sure why that is particularly, because I don't even like Oxford Street, and I never go there. And in Stratford here now, in East London now, we have Westfield shopping centre, so I have no reason to go, and I would never like going anyway, as I say. But I think in a way it's kind of one reason with this one, I think it's kind of a comment on consumerism, and that's kind of the reason that I've written this one. And it's actually about someone who's coming in on a train into Oxford Street, so into Oxford Circus Station, so they're about to get off. And so yeah, it's something that did strike me one time when I was going into arriving into a station at Oxford Circus Station. So this one is called Jackpots. So it's again another poem in the coerced section. Here I am at Oxford Circus Station once again, allowing myself to be part of the human jackpot that's released each time a train pulls in. I don't know if anyone else ever thinks this, but whenever I'm on a train that's entering the station and I'm watching the branded posters on the platform wall whiz past my carriage window, I'm reminded of playing a slot machine. Okay, this one has a single horizontal spinning drum instead of the usual vertical 3, but it's not like the odds are stacked anymore in my favor. The trains come to a stop, and my carriage window reveals a mixed line, Gap Kids, Nike Air, and the Oxford Circus Randall sign. Whatever the combination, though, I'll never win. It's Oxford Street that always wins the prize, with today being no exception. The carriage empties, and every other carriage is emptying too, as shoppers flow like coins from every exit of the train. What else can we do at this stop, when we've all been programmed since birth to have nothing else but shopping on the brain? Right, well, the next poem from this section I'm going to read is another poem to do with social media, and it's kind of about how we kind of exist more. We're almost now starting to exist more through social media than in real life, and it's kind of. I mean, the thing is, it's kind of like a kind of a satirical piece, and it's kind of railing against social media a little bit, which may be a bit ironic that here I am on social media, doing a show, an event. It's part of a live streamed event. But the thing is, and I mean, the thing is, social media. The thing is, social media is a great thing, and it's great what it enables us to do. But there are things underneath, underlying things that really we should be concerned about, and we should always kind of keep in mind, even though it is a great thing, it's a great resource. So yeah, that's kind of again the theme, the same, in a similar way as it was with the Evil Eye poem that I read earlier. It's the same with this one, and this one is called Invisible Twin. I am a conjoined twin, where the half is the invisible man. We're joined at the hip. Pretending to lean against an imaginary wall is my party trick. In any event, I'm required by law to make any person I talk to fully aware that my twin brother is also there attached to me. This relates to an apparently blank section in the Mental Health Act, which isn't blank at all, but printed in invisible ink, invisible to all but specialist lawyers with their ultraviolet eyes and hidden fees. But despite the fact that in legal terms he's attached to me, as opposed to me being attached to him, is my invisible brother, who relatively speaking is free. It's me who's imprisoned, with all my profiles, cover pictures and featured photos. Sometimes I wonder, is social media simply the latest trick employed to fool people into thinking that they're always going to be visible, and that like religion, it's simply a trap? Sooner or later, we'll all be hit by the terrible truth that there really is nothing any of us can do to avoid the same oblivion that my invisible twin is forced to face up to every day, right from the moment he wakes up, or indeed is woken up in the morning by me, anxiously tapping away on my phone, already embarking on yet another daily round of updating all my social media platforms, one by one, then over and over again, desperately trying to remain in sight, and as ever, desperately trying to ignore the increasingly insistent tapping on my shoulder from my peeved brother, who wants nothing more than to simply rest in peace. Right, so the last poem I'm going to read from this section is a little more light-hearted one. It's a poem. It's about a problem that I do have. It's how I can never remember anyone's name. I'm always struggling with people's names. And even if I've kind of really, sometimes it's a case of even if I've kind of got to know the person, you've got that connection, you should remember the name. And it's weird, just sometimes my mind goes blank and I don't know what it is, why that is. It just happens, it's like maybe especially if you haven't seen the person for a little while and suddenly, you're faced with them and it's like, oh no, what is their name? So this is what this poem is about. And it is based on a true incident. And it's called Jan, Jen, or Jean. I hadn't seen her in years. Her name was Jan, Jen, or Jean. I couldn't remember which. My face lit up like a fruit machine when she caught my glance as we passed each other on Southwark Bridge. Hi, Tom, she said, and as if she pressed play, I felt compelled to take the chance. The names began to spin inside my head. Jan, Jen, Jean. I pressed stop too quickly. I had little choice and settled on Jean. Hi, Jean, I said. We passed. I pressed collect and got a sick feeling in my gut as the name Jan for first prize flashed before my eyes. So that was, again, so yes, I was kind of coerced into having to say the person's name, and yeah, that was very embarrassing. But anyway, so straight on to the next section then. Yeah, so the third section is combative. So the fight back starts here. So in this section, the first poem I'm going to read is one called Shopping with Perseus. And again, this is another one that's set on Oxford Street. And it's basically about me as a teenager making my first solo shopping trip to Oxford Street, which isn't really a very exciting subject in itself. So I've added some monsters into the mix just to spice it up a bit. Yeah, so this is the poem. Shopping with Perseus. The night before I made my first daunting solo shopping trip to Oxford Street, Perseus appeared in the dark at the end of my bed. He gave me such a fright, but it was uncanny. His tunic, sandals, curly hair, and ruggedness were exactly as depicted in the book I studied that day at school. He ordered me to sit up and listen carefully, for he was here, he said, to warn me about a new type of Gorgon, the fashion victim, which lurked in every clothing store on Oxford Street. The fashion victim is hideous. Don't look directly at one. Anyone who gazes into an undiscerning eye gets turned to plastic. You must believe it. Where did you think those showroom dummies come from? I was stunned by this revelation, and Perseus, seeing he had my full attention, continued. Fashion victims can be recognized by their permanently bulging eyes caused by ridiculous prices on labels and the multicolored dreads which are actually snakes. With that, I immediately knew that what he thought were Gorgons were simply people copying the glamour grebo style of the Kill Kids, whose latest and biggest hit was Snake Eyes. And Perseus, having obviously seen the video in which their multicolored dreads turned into snakes, had mistakenly thought that what was simply fashion was a matter of life and death. Your mission is to enter their lair. Their lair? It's called Topshop. Locate and buy one pair of winged sandals, make sure they're the red ones, then straight away get out of there. I would go myself, but I am 3,000 years old, far too old to get served in a place like that. But you are young. Your lack of fashion sense has rendered you invisible. There are mirrors everywhere to guide you, and your teenage habit of gazing at your shoes and never looking into people's eyes when they talk to you, nor you to them, will hold you in good stead when dealing with these creatures. So go forth and get me the winged sandals in red. Well, I knew even then that I wouldn't be able to find what he was looking for, and the Gorgons weren't actually Gorgons. But not wanting to make a 3,000-year-old man feel bad, I decided the following night, when Perseus came to see me again, to ask me how my shopping trip had gone, to make up a story. I told him I went into Topshop as instructed, and on was up to Topman. And when he asked, did the Gorgons appear? I said no, as word had spread that a fearless human, protected by Perseus and the goddess Athena, was on his way, and they'd all be killed if they stuck around. But unfortunately, before the Gorgons fled, they destroyed all the stock in the winged sandals section, and that's why I couldn't get my hands on a pair. Perseus, though crestfallen, thankfully seemed to buy my story. He said, don't worry about it. Then asked me for one more favour. Could I next week go instead to Gap and get him a cap of invisibility? Well, that was and then it is straight into the next poem in the combative section. Is another poem set on Oxford Street. So this is the third poem that's set on Oxford Street. It is called Socialist Workers on Oxford Street, and it is again it's set in front of Topshop, and it was just an idea that I had when I've often seen them, the Socialist Workers there with the trestle table near Oxford Circus Station, and there are various places on Oxford Street, but I tend to see them in front of Topshop. And it's just that kind of juxtaposition between these, the very kind of very capitalist symbol that Topshop is basically, I guess, and then the very socialist workers, and just kind of brought up a few things that I thought it was things I could talk about, issues, highlight in a poem, and so I came up with this. So this is Socialist Workers on Oxford Street. Even in front of Topshop, entrenched behind a trestle table. I'll start that again, actually. The thing is, I'm going to have to get new glasses because I should have been able to just wear these the whole time. But anyway, I'm struggling to see a little bit, but I'll start again. Even in front of Topshop, entrenched behind a trestle table, the socialist workers are unable to make their presence felt. They can't be missed, but the twist is not this. Right, for some reason I'm missing this one. Right, okay, I'm going to start that one again now. So I'm going to do it with the title as well, but I'm going to determine to get this one right. Socialist Workers on Oxford Street. Even in front of Topshop, entrenched behind a trestle table, the socialist workers are unable to make their presence felt. They can't be missed, but the twist is that it's not like they'd be missed. The class warriors, armed with 4 semi-automatic mouths and a vast array of incendiary anti-capitalist texts, who think that shoppers want to be liberated, unable to see that shoppers instead have turned their faces into impenetrable shields of apathy. Sure enough, when the fierce-looking man in the red shirt yells out, "Get your socialist worker," no one does. Not one shopper shows the slightest interest, not even a cursory sideways glance. Even when the tiny but very loud woman in the purple dress, with a voice as shrill as the passing bus's screeching brakes, screams, "Capitalism kills," the attack is again repulsed by an endless sea of blank expressions. Granted, the socialist workers are religious enough to keep on going through thick and thin, whereas me, I'm doubting Thomas, needing proof, and unable now to get it, left with nothing, and I don't know who's worse off. In any event, I hate it that everyone and everything is threatened with being submerged by what appears to be an unstoppable tide of commerce, and all that's left to confront it now are 4 delusional communist king Canutes. Right, well, for the next poem that I'm going to read from the combative section is the one poem that I actually use a prop when I'm performing this poem. So I'm going to use that prop now. And the greatest thing about being here on Zoom is that I can actually see myself. I mean, in some ways, actually, that was a kind of a bit disconcerting. Well, it's probably a bit more disconcerting for everyone now, actually. But it was a bit disconcerting for me seeing myself. It's like it feels like you're talking to yourself there. But you know, it turned out to be handy now. So let's put this on so I can check myself. So, right. There you go, just adjust that. So I have a feeling that this is going to mean that WinchesterFest it may well mean that WinchesterFest ends up getting put on the Prevent programme, but here goes anyway. Statement by the Pedestrian Liberation Organisation. We, the PLO, Pedestrian Liberation Organisation, do hereby swear on the sacred highway code that those who dare to attempt to kill pedestrians as they cross the road will from tomorrow incur the deadly wrath of London's shining path. The revolution will not be televised, it will be pedestrianised, and our enemies had better watch out. White van man, each morning for fun, you try to run pedestrians over at the zebra crossing at the start of Shaftesbury Avenue. You arrogant sod, you need to know that what you do will tomorrow be avenged by a PLO hit squad. Hippie cyclist, too busy having dreams about saving the planet, it seems, to think about pedestrians when you jump the lights at Bishopsgate. You're so into human rights, except when it comes to people travelling around London on foot. We'll be left in no doubt. Tomorrow the PLO will sort you out. Bus driver, driving the 66 to Gants Hill, like you're driving the 666 on the highway to hell, getting a cheap thrill out of beeping terrified pedestrians as they try to cross New Wanstead. You may be the devil in a red bus, but you need to know that hell have no fury like avenging members of the PLO. And black cab driver, whose views and life story can't be ignored, your face filled with malice when you deliberately try to mow down shoppers crossing Westow Street in Crystal Palace, equally can't be ignored. No knowledge will help you tomorrow once the revolution's underway, when it won't be just a shoe on the other foot, but both shoes firmly on both feet, not to push down any clutch or throttle, but to march along each street. Pedestrians no longer sheep penned on pavements, bleating 2 legs good, 2 wheels bad, 4 wheels worse, but liberated lions roaring revolution, making every vicious vehicle speeding down the road reverse. We, the PLO, Pedestrian Liberation Organisation, do hereby swear on the sacred highway code that from tomorrow it will be so. Right, that's enough of that. It's get quite warm in that anyway, and at least I can check my hair there again. Right, okay. There we go, I'll have to do. Anyway, so yeah, so that's the last poem I'm going to read is a quite different poem from that last one. It's kind of a more personal poem, and it's a poem from my childhood. And it's kind of, I mean, my childhood was kind of back in the 70s and 80s, as I was saying earlier about when I was talking about the decaying nuclear bunkers. And it's back then, back in the 70s, when we'd always be playing army games, war, because there was a great fascination at the time of World War II. And there was all the war movies were on, on TV all the time. And so, we'd be kind of like fighting, it'd be the Tommies against the Jerrys and that kind of thing. And of course, it was all innocent to us, just innocent games. But of course, World War II, there was a lot, it was still a very serious, obviously it was a very serious issue and still very live in lots of ways. Even, at that time, even 30, 40 years afterwards. And this is what this next poem is about, and it's called The Phoney War. Our imagination's at war, with umbrellas for rifles, our enemy invisible. We defended the sofa, had it pulled out from the wall. Inside this narrow tunnel, with seat cushions overhead, we hid. With each attack, we watched each other's backs. You saw the Germans in your mind I could not see, and I saw mine. We shot them all too easily. With the airstrikes, though, we met our match. Shells like steel fists struck, and the seat cushions punched up into the air fell about us. So we rose and came out fighting, shot down 5 fighters and 3 bombers with 2 umbrellas, and finished off the conflict in close hand-to-hand combat. By the end, there were 1,000 German casualties, and without even a scratch between them, 2 tired Tommies smoking pencils, feeling tough. And now the war was finished, and with both of us famished, we ran from the living room into the kitchen, calling for Gran to serve us up our tea, and found her quietly sobbing at the stove. And that was kind of basically based on a true story. And that was the final poem in the combative section. So we're on to the final section of the book, my book, Grenade Genie, which is available from direct from the publisher. You can get it from me. It's priced $8.99, and it's a full collection, 80 poems. There is 25 poems, but they're all, well, they all ended up being much longer poems, so it ended up becoming a full collection. And I'm going to read the last 3 poems from this, the last section, Corrupted. And this poem I'm going to read is called The Surgery I Go To Has a Two-Headed Doctor. And it was a poem that was originally published in an anthology called Poems for the NHS at 70. And it's kind of the idea, well, it's a slightly satirical poem in the sense that, the government are always saying, even on the 70th anniversary, they were saying, we're pouring more and more money into the NHS, but, in real terms, that may be the case, but in real terms, in terms of like inflation, accounting for inflation, all that kind of thing, isn't actually, it's actually less money. And so this kind of idea was almost like, it's almost like the government's latest cost-saving exercise. Now they're bringing in two-headed doctors. But it's a kind of slightly surreal poem, and some these weird ideas come into my head, and I just run with it. And this is what I came up with in this particular case. So yes, the surgery I go to has a two-headed doctor. The surgery I go to has a two-headed doctor. Dr. Smith will see you now. It gets very confusing. Dr. Smith via his left head gives me a diagnosis. Then via his right head gives me a second opinion, which always differs from the first. And that opinion is never the best one, always the worst. When Dr. Smith examines me with a stethoscope, it's in the left head's left ear and the right head's right ear. In other words, he makes a right pig's ear and also a left pig's ear of any examination he does. However, when I once challenged him about it, Dr. Smith's left head simply said, "Can you breathe in a bit more deeply, please?" while his right head shook morosely. Apparently his wife has two heads as well, with two pairs of breasts. It's said they met as impoverished but physically normal students, earning money by undergoing laboratory tests. Two heads are better than one, they say, but I'm not too sure that comes into play while attending an appointment with the always in two minds Dr. Smith. And the next poem, the second last poem, is again, it's another more personal poem and set in my childhood, and it's a poem called First Kiss. Bone tongue sticking out of grinning knee, a mouth where it shouldn't be, wet and pink like a lizard's gall, a mean mimic of the mouth that's screaming into silence the whole of the playground. Fun fossilized at the sight of bare bone, the teachers keeping us back, not wanting young children to see an open-mouthed kiss set in stone at the exact moment after the knee locked its non-existent lips with the steps that those lips prized open came to be. But I did see it, unfortunately, a gangly gang gash, extreme pornography, a mouth where it shouldn't be, the first kiss I remember most clearly. Yep, and well, the last poem that I'm going to read, so the last poem in the book, and the last poem in the corrupted section, and the last poem in the book is one called Literal Library, and it's just my way of a way of looking at different ideologies in a slightly quirky way, and through this prism of this idea of the literal library. And this is it. So this, yeah, literal library. In the local literal library, under the section marked the Nazis, there are hundreds of books by gay, Jewish and socialist authors, and at the end of each shelf a box of matches. In the section marked Islam, there are 50 copies of the Quran and just one book of interpretation, which changes frequently, depending on which fundamentalist group has control of the shelf. There's no longer any room for books which are off message on the liberalism shelf, which unfortunately has been taken over by hardline fanatics. Dwarfing all these sections is a whole bay reserved for capitalism, shelves which are fully stocked, though only with copies of a book entitled Choice. So much choice, but that's the thing, no choice but choice, and only one kind of choice, choice but no choice. Meanwhile, the bay beside it marked communism, which collapsed many years ago, is yet to be repaired, with the full extent of the damage hidden still by life-size cardboard cutouts of Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il. And remaining rigidly in position, therefore less obvious a wreck, but just as wrecked all the same. The half bay that's allocated to the Roman Catholic Church has somehow ended up with multiple copies of the Sex Guide for Lovers, all of them masquerading as religious books with identical pictures of the Pope on all the covers. While the other half of the bay, the half that the Roman Catholic Church looks down upon, atheism, is completely and utterly empty, only because the books have all been borrowed. And in the literal library, once a book is borrowed from that section, no record is kept. Anyway, so that was the last poem in my book, Grenade Genie. So thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I've enjoyed it maybe more than it may look. And despite the rambling on, I managed to get through it. And yeah, thanks very much for listening. Cheers.